Lawrence.
Yeah, I feel like I know Doug Emhoff. He's actually kind of a neighbor of mine in Los Angeles. I see him at the coffee joint once in a while with his little Secret Service detail following him. But I learned more about him in a speech. And I can't say that about anyone else I actually know who gives speeches. I just learned more about him in that speech than anything I've picked up over the years of listening to him privately. And it's such a unique spot. First person in history to be in this spot. First man.
Yeah.
Second gentleman on his way to being first gentleman, no doubt. And what he has made of that role is a model. By the way, it's a model for spouses of people in power. He was a high-powered member of a law firm, global law firm, working on the entertainment side. Absolutely no conceivable intersection with government. He quit that job and every penny of that income to take a teaching job because he didn't want the slightest possible interpretation of conflict of interest because he was with a law firm that might, in some other office of that law firm, cross into a government situation that could be deemed a conflict of interest. I only wish that other spouses in these situations, male and female spouses, would do this. We have a wife of the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who still works for major law firms in America, taking millions upon millions of dollars a year from major law firms in America while her husband serves as Chief Justice. So Doug Emhoff is the great example of that. Michelle Obama's speech didn't need to carry any of the governing specifics that Barack Obama's speech had to carry. So hers got to be shorter. It got to go straight to the heart and the mind. It got to insist to every voter that you need every vote, that you can't quibble over some slight difference you might have with this candidate. If you find this candidate to be imperfect, but fundamentally on your side, she called it foolishness to even hesitate about supporting eagerly this candidate.
And acting now, talking about the time is short and what needs to be done now.
And then Barack Obama, who does have the most difficult job in politics, which is following Michelle Obama on a stage. There's nothing harder to do, but it's the way we met him. We met him 20 years ago in exactly this context on a convention stage in Boston, and he has been the star of every convention stage he's appeared on since. He has done the impossible every time because he's been great every time and then finds a way to be great again that's different from the last time you saw him be great doing this. He and Michelle Obama went directly at Donald Trump, which I know we're going to hear from an enraged Donald Trump about. But then there were these lines where it had nothing to do with Trump, it seems, except you can't get Trump out of your mind. When Barack Obama says, our fellow citizens deserve the same grace we hope they'll extend to us when we have disagreements. Every previous Republican nominee of my lifetime was capable of saying that sentence in a speech, reading it if someone wrote it for him, and doing it. Donald Trump is the only person that when you see those words, you understand he doesn't know what they mean. He couldn't say them. He doesn't know what they mean. Talking about the joy that his mother-in-law had just being at the kitchen table with family. Donald Trump doesn't know what that means. All those lines that were about the world that Barack Obama thinks we all should live in and that we all appreciate, every one of those lines is alien to everything about Donald Trump.
I want to have our colleagues in Chicago join us. Joy and Alex were there watching on site and in situ. Tell us what you guys thought. Those were three sort of final speeches that all crescendoed toward the final three, each of which I thought was pretty great. How did it feel in the room?
I got to say, I want to talk about Barack Obama first, just because I was really struck. We've talked a lot about, as Lawrence said, the fact that he first appeared on the national radar at a convention hall 20 years ago. And it really felt like this, what we heard from him tonight was kind of, if there's a diptych of the classic Obama speech, this is the second half of a speech from a man who talked most famously about there is no red America, there is no blue America, there is the United States of America, and then had to watch as some of the landmark achievements of his presidency were the attempted dismantling of that by Donald Trump. And it's clear that he's been thinking a lot about what kind of America we really are. And I am sure that the Trump years were very difficult for him, not just as a president, but as a person who fundamentally believes in the goodness and the hope and the optimism that is part of the American project. And it really felt to me, watching him and listening to him tonight, that he looks at the Harris candidacy and the potential Harris presidency as an affirmation of everything he believes America is about. And there's this line at the end of his remarks where he says, I believe that's what we yearn for, a return to an America where we work together and look out for each other, a restoration of what Lincoln called, on the eve of civil war, our bonds of affection. We have thought of this country as hopelessly divided, and I think Obama recognizes it as divided, which is why he invokes the Civil War, but that he still believes that our better angels exist, and that Kamala Harris and her candidacy and her ascension is a manifestation of that. I thought it was a deeply, deeply thoughtful speech at a really critical time, not just for Democrats, but for Americans who have questioned who we are and where we're coming from, and most urgently, where we're going.
Yeah, it's very well put, Alex. And I just think, just to take a sort of meta view of what you're saying, part of what the message here was depth and originality and thoughtfulness is okay. That everything doesn't have to be a slogan and a soundbite, and there's places for those, but there's also place for deeply reasoned, nuanced, surprising, subtle argument, and that itself is a statement for the kind of cultural impact that you're talking about. Joy, what did you think?
Well, I will say tonight was an incredibly cathartic night, I think, for every Democrat in the country, but not necessarily just for Democrats. I did a quick Google as I was listening to one of our great orators, Barack Obama, give his speech. And according to the great Larry Sabato, when they crunched these numbers, some 8.5 million people who voted for Barack Obama turned around and voted for Donald Trump. And so Barack Obama has an ability to cross probably the greatest divide in American politics between Democrats and Republicans, because some of those Trump Republicans were Barack Obama voters, maybe even twice. There are Obama, Trump voters who exist. And so he's still, as divisive as his presidency was, in the sense that people decided to go to war against it, to go to war against him, to trash and go to war against the First Lady, Michelle Obama, he still uniquely sits in a place. It's hard to believe it was 16 years ago, but my kids grew up with him as their president. That's the president they know. That's the world they know. And so the level of expectation that young Americans have about what they can have in a president was set by him. And so I think his speech is important. A couple quick lines. He said, no nation, no society has ever tried to build a democracy as big and as diverse as ours before, one where our allegiances and our community are defined not by race or blood, but by common creed. That is what he believes, that building a multiracial democracy is difficult, and that's why no other country's actually achieved it. He also said that while he understands the difficulty, the vast majority of us do not want to live in a country that is bitter and divided. We want something better. So I think Barack Obama sits in this unique place where he can speak to that voter that might be recalcitrant or resistant to the idea of multiracial democracy because they accepted it for 8 years at some level. And then really quickly to go to Michelle. Michelle Obama was a tour de force tonight. We were talking about this before, Alex and I, that one of the things people often forget is that as talented and brilliant as Barack Obama is as an orator, Michelle Obama is his equal, and every so often, sometimes even better. Michelle Obama preached tonight. She gave a sermon to this country. She gave instructions and things that needed to be done, and this audience ate it all the way up. And the last thing I will say, we also heard love stories tonight. It is so rare to hear the kind of deep and abiding love that we heard from Doug Emhoff. Dougie loves Kamala, and we got that full on. And we can also see that Barack loves Michelle, and they both loved her mom. That love and that joy, this room lit up with it, and it is the reason that they're doing so well on this Democratic side, because they're bringing the love and the joy and the family connection that we lacked at that other convention.
Yeah, it is it's very good. You know, it's a really good point, and it feels like not a bookend, but a companion to the "We love you, Joe. We love Joe. We love Joe." The outpouring of love last night for President Biden on night one, and then to have those love stories talked about on night two, it does feel like companion pieces. Now, speaking of love, I was sitting next to Simone Sanders, former senior staffer to Kamala Harris, who was watching the Doug Emhoff speech, and I thought you, Simone Sanders Townsend, were going to crawl out of your skin. I thought you were going to leave your body. You were so enthused by that speech.
I just, because this is not what Doug Emhoff signed up to do when he went to law school, right? He did not have this on his bingo card. And I remember right after the inauguration in 2020, and the second gentleman then and the vice president, they were going to have to walk up these stairs and do something. And as they were about to walk up, the second gentleman was about to walk right with the vice president. I'm like, no, sir, you don't. I have to. It's like, somebody tell the staff that no one briefed the second gentleman. He's like, to see him standing on that stage tonight, he was fully in his moment. He was standing there, and oftentimes you talk about spouses supporting their partner who's in a powerful position, and I frankly sometimes think we talk about it in a place of that it comes from a place of weakness. And Doug Emhoff is a strong person. He is a strong man who is self-assured, someone who the vice president leans on for advice. He is somebody, if you really want to understand what is going on or how to maybe get your point across better, ask the second gentleman, because he is the best possible counsel. And so to see him standing up there tonight as an example for so many people across the country, because Doug Emhoff's family looks like a lot of families. I am in a blended family. Right? I have a son. I am a stepmother, but I have a son. So I just thought it was amazing for America to see that. Michelle LaVaughn Robinson Obama from the south side of Chicago, honey, was on that stage tonight. And yes, she preached, but frankly, I think that she was fed up. She was fed up with Trump. That's why in 2016 she went low. 2020 when they go low, 2016 when they go low, we go high. Today she looked him dead in the face and gave America instructions. It was what people needed to hear.
Barack Obama, I just thought it was so striking to think about how he started in a convention hall, as we all know, and he gave a speech about red and blue, and it was so striking to have him update it to the algorithms, to the MAGA divisions, to those attacks. He really spoke a bit about you build a wall, then you feel lonely. Yeah. And then he applied that to Kamala Harris and basically said, in so many words, that she is the rightful successor to the Obama-Biden era. And that was so powerful, and I think will be heard well outside of the hall.
And through the kind of politics that Kamala Harris is promising, we can come together as a country. We can do something together. We can reinstate those bonds. Chris?
My favorite moment was when Michelle Obama talked about mistakes.
Yeah.
Because when you're talking about this sort of subtlety, it's like it's like a weird elephant in the room. Like she said they're going to make mistakes. It's like no one says something like that in the convention. Everything is sort of like, we're going to kill it and it's great. And it's like, yeah, they're people.
They are still only human. They're not perfect. Like all of us, they will make mistakes. Luckily, though, this is not just on them.
And that to me was like a very profound point, and also a profound point about democracy, which is it's just people all the way down. And on the other side, the weird AI-generated images of this bizarre kind of God King figure in Donald Trump. And, it's just people. And the people up on the stage, and the people in the hall, and the people out in the country. It's just people all the way down in all of their, flaws and all of their hope and all their aspirations. And I thought she just captured that incredibly beautifully tonight.
But the people who didn't speak at the RNC, a former VP, a former First Lady, a former Second Lady, any former presidents or a former Chief of Staff. So when you talk about the human connection, we saw that connection in the last 2 nights. And my biggest takeaway has nothing to do with politics. Doug Emhoff up there as the second gentleman. We keep saying, oh, we judge men in that position. We as a society, as a culture, haven't decided what to do with the male spouses of powerful women. He was extraordinary, and it just was this unbelievable reminder to our daughters and sons, we might have a black female president. And it doesn't matter what your politics are, in the scope of you got to see it to be it, That's just extraordinary for this country.
I also got to say, it's a huge thing for wife guys everywhere. To see Doug Emhoff. I say that like sort of tongue in cheek, but like it really is true. It is a beautiful thing. He loves his wife, and he loves talking about her, and he thinks the world of her, and it's just a great thing to see.
We've also just had like 2 phenomenal First Lady speeches.
Yeah.
I mean, talking about last night Hillary Clinton was very good and was a presidential candidate in her own right and everything. I really think this Michelle Obama speech was something special, but in part just because of how well it was done, but also some of the stuff that you're talking about, Chris, in terms of the human level. Unfortunately, we know what comes next. We know folks are going to do everything they can to distort her, meaning Kamala Harris's truth. My husband and I sadly know a little something about this. For years, Donald Trump did everything in his power to try to make people fear us. His limited and narrow view of the world made him feel threatened by the existence of 2 hardworking, highly educated, successful people who also happen to be black. Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs? In that moment, when you left your body, because I was sitting here next to you, it was an incredibly well-delivered political punch, and also coming from a place of pain.
Really
Which is
authentic.
inviting our empathy and showing her vulnerability in a way that makes you see one another as human beings. They're both showing it and saying it. It's very powerful stuff.
Extremely powerful.